Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm very pleased to be joined by Brunello Rosa, the CEO and head of research. This week, we're turning back to looking at sort of macro geopolitics. I remember one of the biggest risks going into 2022, obviously, in addition to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, was China's zero COVID policy. And largely, it spooked investors. It seemed very draconian, but also seemed like a manifestation of Xi Jinping's sort of control over the Communist Party. But recently, we've seen some changes in those policies. And we're going to explore that this week and see if that signals a broader U-turn in China's positioning in the world. But Brunello, we've spoken about authoritarian and populist leaders being on the rise before. Xi definitely seems to be kind of an archetypal authoritarian leader that has a stronghold over the party. But I'm curious, how did he achieve this? How did he change the Chinese Communist Party and the systems within it to be as sort of strong as he is today?
So there has been effectively two momentous points in the last few years that have led to a massive consolidation of powers in Xi's hands. The first one was the change in the constitution that occurred in 2018, by which effectively Xi managed to affirm that he could remain president for life instead of having the usual 10-year term of presidents, which is kind of 2 5-year terms each, in which a premier is then appointed, and that premier in the following 10 years tend to become the president. Therefore, the institutional setting was such that there would be evolution rather than evolution at the top, because the premier gets ready for 5, potentially 10 years to become the next president. And then the president, when he has finished his 10-year terms, retires and somehow disappears from the political scene. Well, this has changed with the second momentous point, in which Xi became the leader of the Communist Party for the third time in a row, something that none of his predecessors have recently achieved. So with these two facts, Xi clearly consolidated the power in his hands and appointed a Politburo that made sure that it wouldn't pose any challenge to his policies, because he was effectively filled with loyalists instead of having critical voices. Let's not forget that even in single party systems, or even in democratic system whereby there's a strong centrist party that stays in power for decades, it's not that the political dynamics is over. There tend to be currents of different lines of thought within the same institutional party. So politics is within the party instead of being between parties or among multiple parties. Instead, with these changes, there's kind of consolidation of power and a reduction of the internal debate.
I see. I mean, I think lots of analysts often make the mistake of thinking of China as this monolithic institution, but it really has a real diversity of thought even within it. And Xi's managed to kind of reign supreme and sort of his ideology affecting all the others. Another thing that stood out to me this week was we talked about the sort of zero COVID policy. And we've always talked about the risk of China having this large population that's been promised this economic growth. If that were to be suppressed, do we have this potential for social unrest? And we saw that manifest a little bit in response to the zero COVID policy. And what did Xi Jinping do as a response to the protests, and what does this tell us about his sort of grip on power?
So he clearly saw the protests that for the first time were not simply against local leaders, but against national leader himself being called out and the party itself. That tends to be intolerable for people at the top. And the response to tend to be in two directions. On the one hand, of course, there's repression, because that's how regimes operate. But at the same time, they also listen and understand that they need to redirect this anger against something else, or channel through some changes that would make the population feel less constrained. And this is what happened with the COVID policy first. So effectively, Chinese Communist Party allowed those restrictions that were in place in various cities to be somehow eased. It wasn't really an official U-turn on the COVID policy. It became from 0 COVID cases to 0 COVID deaths. But also that one is clearly unattainable. Actually, the Communist Party itself, the state had to admit 60,000 people having died since December. That's the result of COVID being still there and the reopening of the economy. That, of course, means more contagion, more infections, more death. So the Communist Party was ready to show that they listened to the protest of the people, and they can do something about it. So the question that we ask ourselves this week is that the signal of something bigger going on, or will remain limited to that? And bigger mean, of course, changing course compared to let's say, vis-a-vis the Ukrainian crisis, and so the support to Russia and the overt confrontation with the US. So these are the things that we investigate this week.
I see. And if we were to, double down on that question about Russia, obviously everyone has been making parallels about the invasion of Ukraine, parallels with, the potential invasion of Taiwan, effectively two big states trying to, security maximize by capturing their sort of security bottleneck. Russia and China have had this quote unquote limitless cooperation, especially when Putin and Xi have sort of state visits. This is reaffirmed. But you point out a couple of things in this week's column that might sort of point to doubts about that relationship. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we discussed already in the past that some cracks were emerging in this sort of limitless cooperation. One thing is telling your ally, look, Ukraine is a problem for me. I need to take care of it. Please back me up, support me, don't put me in the spot against the West, and things like that. A different thing is, of course, starting not just a special military operation, as Putin put it at the beginning, but a large-scale invasion of a sovereign country, which was on the verge of getting closer to the EU, that borders with NATO. So, it's like beginning a major geopolitical shift that risk endangering the entire world order, which clearly is one of the aims of China itself. But there's a question of timing, and there's a question of modality. This happened super fast, and it happened in a very brutal way. Maybe the Chinese wouldn't go that far. The second thing is more the details that seem having emerged from recent press reports, saying that in the famous meeting on the 4th of February between Xi and Putin would have, according to the reports, hidden to Xi his real intentions about the invasion. It was something like, look, things may get worse, I need to take care of it. China said, fine. Different is, okay, I've already planned an invasion. It would be thousands of deaths. It will last for years. You need to be ready to provide military and diplomatic or whatever support to this operation. Are you ready for that? So the irritation emerged, according to this press report, in the Chinese authority from the way she was presented by Putin. It's its intentions regarding Ukraine. And clearly, the US and China were already, say, on different paths to some extent, but they seem to go on a collision course with this war in Ukraine, an acceleration of a confrontation that for the Chinese shouldn't be happening for decades, and instead it seems already happening. So clearly, there might be some rethinking in Beijing about what's going on there.
I see. And, it seems like everything that we've discussed is reinforced by a reframing of all of China's priorities, where the central relationship is the relationship with the US and how they can manage that. And that's perhaps reinforced when, 15 days ago, the foreign minister position in China, a very important one, was it was added to Qin Gang, who used to be the ambassador to Washington, and taken away from Wang Yi, who was a serving foreign minister for almost 10 years. And that, as you point out, might potentially be signal a shift in the sort of broader foreign policy, also indicated by the reversal on the zero COVID policy. But
and I would say that it's a good signal that this new foreign minister has been appointed, especially because he was in the US and has been pro-Western for a period. It took, apparently, among the various things that Xi Jinping said during the last Congress, that China relies on the world for his own future. So a kind of a signal of openness rather than a signal of closure. But our conclusion is this is a good signal. It's very unlikely that this long-term Cold War II, the way we call it, between US and China, this rivalry would go away at some point. It's probably here to say. The question is the speed and the intensity of such Cold War and how fast it may become hot, which is, of course, in nobody's interest. So that's what we wanted to discuss here. The limitless cooperation between Russia and China is not totally in danger yet, but might be revisited. The relationship between US and China might be improving at the margin with the appointment of a new foreign minister, and there might be a meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping in November when there's a APEC meeting in San Francisco. That could be a moment of, say, rekindling ties. However, geopolitics, somehow, the rise of China, the fact that there's an incumbent, a challenger to the incumbent power, means that the long-term trajectory is very unlikely to change. But again, speed and intensity of the Cold War between the two superpowers may change and may become less worrisome for all of us.
It certainly seems like, so whatever ideology sort of new members might bring into the foreign ministry, geopolitics still remains supreme. And the great power competition and China's potential challenger, all of that will still largely define China's role, while, as you rightly pointed out, the policy towards the US, the policy towards Russia might kind of be amended on the margins and the edges. So a very sort of interesting discussion today, and certainly one we'll continue to watch, especially this being a kind of crucial year for China, as they're moving away from the zero COVID policy, but also crucial questions rising over the relationship with Taiwan, the relationship with Hong Kong, and the sort of protectionist policy put under place in Biden. So, of course, sort of a discussion we'll keep revisiting. As always, thanks so much for your time and insight, Brunello.
Thank you very much. Until next time.